All right, we made it. It's part 12 of the Chris Watts prison interview analysis. The final part in our coverage of what may be the most bizarre conversation that most of us have ever heard and will ever hear. All through the series, we've answered the important questions of how does a person get to thinking that this is a good thing to do, let alone that they'll get away with doing it? And also, why did no one see it coming? And now, at the back end of the interview, they cover a lot of topics, and we can kind of put a period on all those answers and wrap it up. So, before we get right into that, I have a quick confession to make because in the last video I kind of misrepresented myself when I brought up how Graham said one of the funniest things that's ever been uttered by a human voice when he says, "Chris, you care deeply about others." And because it's in the horrible context of being at the back end of a lot of disturbing revelations and the sickening way that Chris would provide them in a way where he's going for sympathy for himself. So I said no one would probably laugh at that. But I have to admit that I did laugh hysterically the last time I listened to it because it's actually perfect comedy in that it's unexpected, but it fits because it's exactly the type of thing that Graham would say because he is just shameless in his attempts to buddy up to Chris and butter him up. So don't feel bad. I'm sorry if I made you feel guilty for laughing at it. I did too. And where we left off was we were covering how at the sentencing hearing, the judge told Chris that he was free to go and live a happy life with his mistress. Oh, I'm sorry. That's from the parallel universe in Chris's fantasy world where nobody judges each other. No, we actually left off at a part where they're starting to talk about the mistress, and this goes into the question of why Chris would murder when there were many non murderous solutions to all of the problems. People give Chris a lot of excuses for why he did the murder, but all of those excuses have non murderous solutions that most people would take, even though they are tough and it's a struggle to get through them, but most of us do them because it's better than murdering. So, why would Chris do it? People point to the fact that there were money issues, Shanann's social media personality. They say the big one is the mistress. They say he was influenced by her or he did it for her when that's just not true. It's presented as true, but it's not true at all because we see, especially at the end here, Chris didn't even know the mistress. He barely knew anything about her. He only spent a few weeks with her, maybe a lot of time during those weeks, but things that are covered in this interview is he didn't know she was bipolar until after he was arrested. He hadn't met any of her friends or family. He hadn't been a part of her life. He didn't know she was dating other men. So he knew so little about her as a person. It's not like she was this perfect soulmate where he met her and they would have this perfect life if only his family wasn't in a way. So he just felt like he had to do it to get this much better relationship where he would finally be happy. No, he didn't even know who she was. It was a fling. And the reason that it's such a source of excuses for people to say that the mistress was either behind it or the reason that he did it or she changed his mind is because murderers kind like Chris, murderers are doing it for reasons other than just self-defense, who don't really need to when they choose to, like Chris, they always are waiting for an excuse to do it, some reason to do it where they can justify it in their own mind. And Chris says that very quickly in the way that he reveals something and then doesn't want anyone to bring it up again, so he just kind of moves along and never refers to it again. He says that thing about how it was always in the back of his mind really quickly and never refers to that again. It was always in the back of his mind that something like that was going to happen. And I think that is one of the most telling things that he said out of all the things he said. Because as we've covered, he was never able to reconcile the horrible thoughts that every brain produces. Every human brain takes in all the information and gives us every possibility that can happen based on that information. And we choose to do with that information what makes us who we are. And Chris, from a young age, as we discussed, branched off towards being a murderer in the way that he had positive reinforcement for lying, and he always had to be the good, perfect one. I'm the good one. So he wasn't able to reconcile the horrible thoughts that everybody has in our minds with also being seeing the benefits of lying and also being the good, perfect child, because those things don't mix. If he had known how to process horrible thoughts and deception into a socially acceptable context, he would have branched off that way towards non murderous behavior. But instead, as he developed into an adult, he went towards murder. And that's why it was always in the back of his mind that something like that was going to happen. He was waiting for an excuse to do it because he had developed in his own fantasy world to the point where he thought that was something that would be a great achievement to do, to prove his superiority to everyone else, to fool everybody, and to do with the horrible thoughts in his mind that he always thought about and didn't know what to do with. He thought this is what he should do, and this was how he would prove his superiority, his greatness at lying, and still trick everybody into thinking that he was the good, perfect guy. Not that he did it for the mistress. That was just his means to an end. And if it wasn't her, it would have been some other reason that came up. This was just his first excuse to finally try it. He thought all the stars were aligning. And that's why when he talks about it, he refers to things as being in motion and he didn't have control over them, because it was always in the back of his mind that he was going to eventually do it. And then he started seeing things fall into place. And he said, well, here we go. So no excuses for Chris, other than he didn't develop into a proper adult. That's his one excuse, is that he didn't know how to reconcile horrible thoughts with being a good person, which is what most people do. And on that subject of how his mind branched off into murderer, we get how he, when they're asking him about the interrogation, why didn't he just come clean? And he says, I couldn't admit it to myself, so I couldn't admit it to anyone else. And that goes into the equation that we covered in the interrogation review, the equation that Chris plugs everything he says and thinks into this one equation to justify his actions and why it's okay for him to lie and do bad things and trick people. If nobody knows that it happened, did it really happen? So that's him not admitting it to himself. No one else saw it. No one's confronting me with it. So I guess it just didn't happen. That's Chris's equation. If no one saw it, if no one says they know what happened, then it didn't really happen that way. We can all just pretend that what everyone thinks is reality. And the kind of exclamation point to that is later on when he says, if they ask him, could anything have made you confess? And he says, if you had lied and said that you saw the kids alive on the security camera footage, then I would have confessed. And that's his compliance to make the people in front of him happy, which also shows that complying and making people happy is more important to him than the truth and just conforming to reality and being honest. He'd rather be deceptive and make people happy than be his true self and possibly make people mad. So he would only reveal the truth if they said that they already saw it. Therefore, if nobody saw that or nobody heard that tree fall in the forest, it didn't really fall. So at this point, they've gone into basically recapping the interrogation in this strangely casual way. When the part of the interrogation that was covered in part 13 of my interrogation review, I think that was the worst hour of his entire life. The time from the hour after he confessed to murdering Shanann, where he had the hopelessness of he can never go back to before, when everyone just saw him as a good guy, but also the terror, the hopelessness of never going back, combined with the terror of he didn't know how it was going to be going forward as everyone learned who he really was and what he really did. So that hopelessness combined with the terror, I think that was the worst hour of his life, even worse than getting handcuffed and taken away to jail and put in a tiny cell and crying. I think he got used to that. And that wasn't as bad as the hopelessness combined with the terror. But he's talking about it in a normal way, like it was just something funny, a funny story that happened a couple days ago. Which, even though it was the downfall of his entire life, he's once again acclimating to the most extreme situation and talking about it like it's a normal everyday occurrence, which is why this guy is so tricky. He's not showing his true feelings about it. It was the worst time of his entire life, but he's talking about it like he lost a golf game or something. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. And that's where we go into how they address Chris's lack of emotion, why he wasn't giving them anything in the interrogation, so they were desperate enough to just start throwing those situations out there. And he was like, yeah, I know, it's because I didn't show emotion. And it's not a lack of emotion, it's just where his emotions lie. It's who he feels emotions for and what can make those emotions happen in him. He's never in his adult life felt emotions for others other than how he can manipulate them into giving him positive feedback, making him feel good about himself. So that's why he was able to just turn off any sort of responsibility for his wife and kids when they weren't doing it for him anymore. When the mistress was giving him those feeling, making him feel good about himself, and his wife and kids weren't anymore. They just weren't doing anything for him anymore. That's why when he talks about the time after murdering them and disposing of the bodies, he says nothing registered then. And that's why he had the lack of emotions for them. He had high emotions from what we see of the footage. He was feeling giddy and gleeful. When he was talking, it's almost as if the word glee was superimposed on every other word he was saying. Like in those media interviews, he's like, Bella's mothering like me, glee, glee, and Cece is gung-ho, we call it rampage, glee, glee, glee. So he was feeling emotions, it's just which emotions was he feeling and for what? No emotions for the loss of his family because in his mind they were already gone before he murdered them. And his mind was on his new source of making him feel good about himself, the mistress. And probably all the attention he was getting for his family being missing at that time. So that's why it didn't register, as he says next, until he got in the cell and he was all alone and he didn't have anyone left. No one left to make him feel good about himself. So that's when he started feeling the sadness and the loss, when there was no one left to make him feel good about himself and he was just all alone thinking about how he screwed up and got caught. So then he brings up an example of why he has allegedly no emotions, but we've already covered which emotions he has. He says it's no emotions, or he doesn't show emotions. He hides his emotions. He's not a guy to show them. He says how he brings up the part about the interrogation when Tammy mentioned, if I lose my kids in the supermarket for 10 seconds, I start to panic. Panic. And I haven't seen any of that from you, Chris. And Chris says that, referring back to that, like, yeah, you said that. And if I lost my kids in the supermarket, I wouldn't panic. I would just be trying to look for them. But the thing about that is he's trying to say like that's an everyday thing. But I was thinking when I heard that, damn, 10 seconds to panic, Tammy, that's cold. Because I think most parents would say the panic is immediate. It sets in right away. I remember I just turned around for 1 or 2 seconds to look where I was sitting down while I was keeping an eye on my toddler in a museum. I never actually sat down. I got almost down and then sprang right up again because as soon as I looked back, less than a second later, he was gone. And it was immediate panic. It wasn't out of control, but it set in right away. Where is he? Where'd he go? What happened? Is somebody walking away with him? Is someone holding a bundle? Is someone walking quicker than everyone else? Oh no, people are looking at me. Why isn't anyone telling me? Did anyone see? Are they looking at me because they saw something? It sets in right away and then escalates with every second that passes and you don't see your kids. So to be, in all fairness for Tammy, she might have said 10 seconds just because she was in the trying to appeal to Chris Watts mode, but maybe it would have set in immediately for her too. So for Chris to just say, yeah, I wouldn't panic, and I believe that he wouldn't panic. He would probably, even if he saw someone walking away with his kids and abducting them, he would probably play dumb, pretend he didn't see anything, and then act innocent the way he did after the crime he committed. He would just do the same thing if someone else took his kids away, because he didn't really feel any emotions for them and they weren't doing it for him anymore. It's where those emotions lie. And that's where we get to, this is a personal thing, but it's all through this series. I've been talking about the difference between hearing this prison interview just in a vacuum and the vast difference between that and comparing it to the evidence and the other footage available. It's such a contrast. And the most striking contrast of all is the image I've gotten of what the ghosts of his wife and kids are thinking as they're watching all this. After he murdered them and disposed of the bodies, all through this interview and all the other footage, I'm thinking, what are the ghosts of his family thinking if they're watching this? And the image I get of them just when I was listening to the prison interview with no knowledge of anything else in the case, I got the image of his kids asking, Mommy, is Daddy going to be okay? What's wrong with Daddy? And Shanann saying to them, don't worry, Daddy will be fine, girls. We'll just stay with him until everything is okay. We'll watch over him. That's the image I got, and I'm disgusted to think back on that because of how different the image of them is now that I've seen all the footage and a lot of the evidence. Now I get the picture of them watching him through the interrogation or watching him talk in this prison interview, and I get the image, which is so different, of them, like Bella and Celeste saying things like, Mommy, why didn't Daddy just tell us this stuff? Why didn't you just tell us? Why did he do that to us? And Shanann saying, I don't know, sweetheart, I don't know. Let's go visit Nana and Papa. Let's get out of here. And just leaving him to the rest of his miserable life because he's not worth it. I don't think they're visiting him in his cell, from what we now know of him and what he did. But I get sickened when I think back to the fact that Chris had molded my perception of their memory to where they would be feeling sorry for him. Think about that. The murderer who took away everything you ever had and everything you would ever have again is now convincing people that the memory of you is that you felt sorry for the murderer who took your life. Disgusting. So that's when they're wrapping things up and we get to the ultimate parting shot that Graham delivers. And it's the perfect way to wrap up this whole interview and our coverage of it. When they're waiting for the security guards to come in and take Chris back to his cell, Chris asks, I think he's thinking about all that freedom outside this prison. He asks, are you guys going to explore the area at all? And there's a lot of answers that kind of get lost in the clamor. Everyone's talking at the same time and laughing. They're saying like, oh, there's so much snow, you can't see anything. I don't think no one reacts to Graham's answer, but I think that it was a snake bite into Chris Watson. It followed him down that long, straight hallway all the way back to his cell. Graham says, going to explore the hotel hot tub. No one responds to it, but I think when they talk about that long, straight walk back to his cold, tiny cell, the bathroom that he calls his new home, and the toilet that he calls his new wife, he says good night and good morning to her every day. I think that his shoulders started to slump. I think he was starting to hang his head, and I think by the time he got back to the end of that cell, the end of the hallway, he was really dragging his feet, thinking about, I'm going into this cell, and the door closes behind him, and he's in that tiny cell alone. He's thinking about Graham going back to that hotel room and kicking back in the hot tub. And I think that was on his mind when he said, I just want to get out of here. And I think that's going to be on his mind every day for the rest of his life. The fact that he has to go back to his cell and spend most of the rest of his life there while everyone who didn't make his decisions can explore the hotel hot tub. And I think all of us should leave Chris to his tiny cell and treat yourself. Celebrate the fact that you made good decisions in your life by going to a hotel room and sitting in the hot tub. If you can't afford that, take a nice hot bath. And if you can't have a hot bath, get up and just walk 10 feet because you will be walking further and celebrating a greater degree of freedom than Chris Watts can for most of his day. And celebrate the fact that you've made good decisions in your life because you can explore that amount of freedom just moving 10 feet. If you can't walk, have a loved one that you didn't murder help you move 10 feet or further and celebrate the fact that even though maybe your dreams didn't come true, maybe a lot of your life has been a struggle, but you've still done well enough where you can move 10 feet if you want to. Just give yourself a pat on the back and enjoy that. I'm going to do that after I'm done talking. So that wraps up my coverage of this case. I might do a video somewhere down the road, but I don't think I can chop this guy up into any smaller pieces. If you've enjoyed my coverage, I have links to other YouTube channels that helped me understand it, so you can check those out. Their links are in the description. If you enjoyed my non-true crime videos and my literary stuff, there is a link in the description to my Patreon page. My book is available there because I haven't learned enough about Amazon to trust them yet. But for $1 a month, you can check out the text version of my book. I'm still working on the audio version. And other than that, that's where I'm going to wrap things up here. And take care of yourself. Celebrate all the good decisions you've made. Celebrate the fact that you're not in Chris Watch's situation. And I'll see you next time.